I remember the moment like a snapsh asterisk T burned into my mind. One of those frozen frames you can't unsee, no matter how many times you try to tell yourself it meant nothing. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of early spring day where the sun stays out just long enough to fool you into thinking summer's closer than it is. I was still in my work clothes, jacket unbuttoned, tie half loosened, and I had my keys in one hand and the mail in the other. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, which was odd. Lena never cleaned on Thursdays. I stepped into the kitchen, expecting to see maybe a coffee mug in the sink or the faint steam of something cooking on the stove. Instead, the first thing that caught my eye was the counter. There were 2 wine glasses sitting there. Not unusual by itself. Lena and I had shared wine countless times, but this was different. One was empty, turned slightly toward the sink as if abandoned mid-conversation. The other still held a small pool of deep red at the bottom, clinging to the glass in lazy streaks. My mind immediately tried to rationalize it. Maybe she'd poured one for herself and left the other out for me. But the arrangement didn't make sense. The second glass wasn't even in the kitchen. It sat on the living room windowsill, framed by the last rays of evening light. The glass caught the glow, turning the remaining wine into a jewel-like ember. Around the rim was a soft red mark. Lipstick. The kind Lena rarely wore at home. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. But then my gaze drifted down to the scarf lying next to the glass. It was a man's scarf, dark wool, thick weave, neatly folded. Not something I owned. Not something I'd ever seen Lena wear. It looked freshly set down, like whoever had worn it had only just left, or worse, was still somewhere in the apartment. I stood there longer than I probably should have, staring at the scarf like it might offer an explanation if I looked hard enough. My ears picked up the faint hum of the fridge, the tick of the wall clock, the sound of my own breathing. No laughter, no footsteps, no sound of a shower running. Nothing to indicate another presence. Still, the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Before I could process what I was going to say, or even decide if I was going to say anything, Lena appeared from the bedroom. She wasn't in her work clothes anymore. She wore a soft gray sweater and leggings. Her hair pulled up in a way that suggested she'd been home for a while. But she didn't greet me with the usual kiss on the cheek. She didn't ask about my day or even comment on my being late. Instead, she locked eyes with me for a brief second, then let her gaze slide past mine, straight toward the hallway. "You know," she said, her voice taking on a brisk edge, "you really need to do something about that mess in your workshop." I went in there earlier looking for the step ladder, and I could barely move without tripping over something. The change in subject was so abrupt it was almost physical, like she'd thrown a wall up between us. I opened my mouth, ready to say something about the glasses, the scarf, the lipstick, but she was already moving toward the dining table. She set her phone down, face down of course, and adjusted a placemat like it suddenly mattered more than anything else. The scent of her perfume hung faintly in the air, not overpowering but new. It wasn't the one she'd worn for years, the soft vanilla and citrus I could recognize with my eyes closed. This one was sharper, more floral, the kind that lingers in your memory because you've never smelled it before. "You hungry?" she asked, as if nothing was out of place. I didn't answer right away. My eyes flicked back to the scarf, the wine glasses, the phone lying face down. None of it moved. None of it explained itself. "I could make pasta," she continued, her tone casual but her body language tight. Shoulders slightly raised, movements precise, as if she were performing the act of being relaxed rather than actually feeling it. Who was here? The question was out before I even thought about it, and it hung in the air like a challenge. She froze for just a fraction of a second, not long enough for most people to notice, but I did. Then she laughed softly, shaking her head. "No one. Why?" My eyes moved deliberately toward the scarf. "That yours?" She followed my gaze, then smiled like it was the most ridiculous question she'd ever heard. "No. I found it on the stairs this morning. Must belong to one of the neighbors. I brought it in so it wouldn't get lost." The explanation slid out of her mouth effortlessly, but it felt too smooth, too ready, like she'd already prepared it. I'll take it down later, she added quickly, as if that would close the subject. I nodded, but I didn't believe her. Not entirely. Still, I said nothing more. Not then. We moved through the evening like actors in a poorly rehearsed play. I pretended to listen as she talked about a problem at work, and she pretended not to notice the way my eyes kept drifting toward the wine glass on the windowsill. Her phone buzzed twice. Sharp, short vibrations against the table. But she didn't pick it up, didn't flip it over. At one point, I walked over to the windowsill, picked up the glass, and turned it slightly in the light. The lipstick mark caught the glow, a perfect half-moon imprint. I felt my jaw tighten. You going to drink that? I asked, not looking at her. No, she said quickly. I was just enjoying the view earlier. The words landed oddly. We lived on the 3rd floor, facing a parking lot. The view was hardly worth lingering over, especially with wine. I set the glass down gently and walked back to the kitchen. The scarf remained on the sill, undisturbed, like a silent witness to something I wasn't supposed to see. The rest of the night passed in a blur of ordinary motions. Washing dishes, folding laundry, half-watching a show. But every time I moved through the living room, those 3 things stayed where they were, untouched. The scarf, the wine, the lipstick. Each one felt like a breadcrumb leading to a story I wasn't being told. By the time we went to bed, I hadn't asked another question. I lay beside her in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of what I'd seen and how she'd reacted. The wine, the scarf, the deflection, the phone face down, and the way she'd never actually answered the question, only redirected it until I let it drop. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I already knew it was something. I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay flat on my back with the ceiling fan chopping the darkness into slow, hypnotic blades, counting seconds between Lena's breaths and the little pings of her phone. It was face down, of course. Always face down lately, the new posture of her secrets. The scarf and the lipstick glass sat out there in the living room like evidence bags I hadn't sealed. I could feel them the way you feel a cracked tooth with your tongue. Compulsively, painfully. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the neat fold of wool and the crescent of color on the rim. I kept telling myself not to be dramatic. Then another ping came from her phone, and I started reassembling the last few months like tiles on a table. Tile 1, the late nights. The grant deadline moved up, she said in January. We're short-staffed. In February. By March, I'll be home before midnight, promise. She started carrying a second tote with a laptop I never saw open at home. The nights lengthened, and I learned the silence of coming back to an apartment that smelled like her perfume but not like dinner, like hairspray but not like her laughter. Tile 2. The screen tilt. Lena used to hand me her phone to show me office dogs or memes I'd already seen. Lately, she held it angled away. When I walked into a room, the screen dimmed in a quick little bow, then returned to her face, to fingers moving in soft, practiced swipes. Once, I came up behind her and kissed her shoulder blade, and she actually flinched. You startled me, she said, smiling too wide. The text she'd been typing vanished into a blank lock screen. Tile 3, the weekends away. Olivia's bachelorette, she said in early spring, packing a carry-on with the precision of a flight attendant. Spothing with the girls. A month later, buying tickets to a city 2 hours away that we'd always talked about visiting together. She came back late Sundays smelling like hotel sheets and airport coffee, hairstyled in a way our local salon didn't do. Tile 4, the money. The shared account pinged with charges that didn't match the stories. Boutique hotels. Password-style restaurants. A jewelry receipt tucked into a grocery bag. When I asked, she laughed. A little treat, she said, turning her head so her new earrings caught the light. For surviving a brutal quarter. The numbers disagreed. The numbers said she was living extra on weekends without me. Tile 6. The salon hair. Tuesday morning, a messy bun. Tuesday night, a glossy blowout that survived wind and sleep. I found an appointment card from a salon across town, a place we'd never used. When I mentioned it, she shrugged. First-timer discount, she said. That same week, a new bracelet appeared on her wrist, thin as a lie. Tile 7. The stories themselves. They arrived pre-smooth like email templates. If I asked follow UPS, she had them ready, names, times, emojis. But the details were too clean. Real-life phrase at the edges. Her stories had crisp margins and bullet points. She didn't stumble. She delivered. Tile 8. Me. The way I changed without noticing. I stopped asking how her day was, because the answers were copy-paste. I started washing mugs we hadn't used and counting wine corks like a superstition. I switched my ringtone off because my own phone made me think of hers. I looked for hair that wasn't mine on our pillowcases and hated myself for looking. I took up small chores at odd hours just to pass the door to her side of the hall. Tile 9. The city. I started recognizing the skyline of that other city from the photos she didn't post. Just the reflection in her sunglasses. The hint of a hotel lobby in the background of a selfie sent only to me. I knew the shape of a rooftop bar because she forwarded a funny sign from a bathroom there. She never tagged the location. Her friends never commented. It was as if the weekends were happening in a closed circuit where I wasn't invited. Tile 10. Jewelry that appeared without a reason. A slim chain, a right-hand ring. I bought them, she said. The receipts disagreed. Each tile on its own is nothing. Together, they made a picture I didn't want to see. Lying next to her, I could feel the outline of it pressing up through the mattress. I told myself mosaics can be reworked if you catch them before the grout hardens. Around 3 in the morning, she rolled over and tucked her knees behind mine. The way she used to when we were newly married, when the simple geometry of stacked bodies was enough to call a day good. I held my breath. Her phone pulsed on the nightstand. One soft glow that lit the ceiling, then died. She didn't move. Maybe she was asleep. Maybe she was pretending to be. I thought about the scarf. I thought about how she said it was a neighbor's, how she'd take it down later. I imagined knocking on doors, holding it up like a lost and found. Maybe someone would claim it. Maybe no one would, and it would become ours by default. Just before dawn, I gave up on sleep and made coffee in the dark. I stood in the kitchen watching the machine drip and thought about evidence. Not lipstick or tidy stories, proof. Proof is a receipt. Truth is the pattern your bones recognize. When she woke, she padded out barefoot, hair mussed, sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder. Casual Lena, unarmored Lena. She kissed my cheek, automatic, and said, "You're up early." Her voice had that morning roughness I love. It almost worked on me. Almost. "I have a delivery at the shop," I said. "Figured I'd get a head start." She nodded, reached for a mug, and passed me mine the way she always had. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't look at it. I did. "Big weekend?" I asked lightly. "The girls again?" She took a slow sip and made a small face, too hot. "Maybe," she said. "We're thinking about it." "We, girls, maybe, thinking." The words felt pre-cushioned. I smiled. I told her to have fun. I told myself to stop being a jealous stereotype. Then she reached for her mug again, and the sleeve of her sweatshirt slid back, and I saw the bracelet glint in the kitchen light. I had seen it last night. I had seen it last week. I realized I had never seen it in daylight, in the honest hours. And without planning to, I thought, someone gave that to her at a time of day when I do not exist. That thought stayed with me through the drive to my shop, through the unlocking of the metal gate and the dusty glow of antique clocks all ticking at slightly different times. I polished a guitar that wasn't for sale and listened to old radios hiss into life, searching for stations the city no longer broadcast. The shop felt like a refuge for honest objects, things that simply did what they were built to do. The phone in my pocket stayed silent, respectful of a pact I hadn't named. I told my hands to keep working. I told my eyes not to invent what they wanted to see. And yet, every reflective surface gave me two versions of my face, the one who believed her and the one who didn't. By lunchtime, I knew which man would win. That night, I went home and set the scarf gently on the back of a chair. I left the wine glass on the windowsill. I said nothing. I was done accusing shadows. The picture was already forming itself. All I had to do was stand back far enough to see. I stayed awake. The high school reunion wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It was supposed to be harmless nostalgia. A catered dinner, awkward hugs with people I hadn't seen in a decade, a few bad jokes about how none of us had changed. I didn't even plan on going until they asked me to be one of the event sponsors. My antique shop had been doing well, and a little community goodwill never hurt. Besides, Lena had encouraged it. "You should go," she'd said, brushing her hair back casually. "It'll be good for you to catch up." She hadn't mentioned coming along, so when she texted me an hour before the event saying she might swing by for a little bit, it caught me off guard. The hall was warm with the heat of too many people in dress clothes, the air smelling faintly of wine and nostalgia. I just finished introducing a few folks to Tom, a guy from my graduating class who had been something of a legend in our basketball team days. When the energy in the room shifted, she froze in the doorway. "Lena." It wasn't just surprise. It was the kind of stillness that happens when the fight or flight instinct hits hard. Her eyes went to me, then to Tom beside me. The change in her face was subtle but immediate, as if she'd just walked into the middle of a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight but polite enough for public consumption. "Lena," I replied, my voice equally measured. Around us, conversation quieted, and the sound of clinking glasses faded into the kind of hush that's really just a cover for people straining to hear. I didn't know what I was bracing for until I started catching the looks. Little glances exchanged over the rims of wine glasses. A whispered name. A muffled, "Is that her?" Then someone leaned a little too close to their friend and said it loud enough for me to catch. "That's the one who used to see Tom after she got married." It landed like a pin drop in my brain, sharp and precise. I kept my posture still, but my mind was already riffling back through years of memories. Lena's unexplained absences in our first year of marriage, those overnight work retreats that hadn't seemed worth questioning at the time, the handful of times she'd come home with the faint scent of a cologne that wasn't mine. The whispers didn't stop. A couple from the old drama club drifted closer and, in the low, gossipy tone people think is subtle, started recounting a story about Lena being spotted at a downtown hotel bar with Tom 3 months after our wedding. One of them claimed they'd actually seen her go upstairs with him. It wasn't just one rumor. It was a chorus. Pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed suddenly dropped into place. Her weekends away back then, the way she'd avoided certain reunions or events where Tom might be. I glanced at Tom. His expression was tight, his jaw working like he was chewing over a confession he didn't want to make here. When the crowd shifted again, I took the opportunity to step aside with him near the back wall, away from the buffet line. "I'm guessing you've heard the same whispers I have," I said quietly. He didn't deny it, didn't even try. Instead, he exhaled hard through his nose and nodded once, like someone signing off on bad news. "Ethan," he started, voice low. "I'm not proud of it. Back then, she told me she wasn't ready for marriage. Said things had moved too fast, that she was feeling trapped. I believed her. I thought she was leaving you." "And when she didn't?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "She kept coming around anyway, for months. And then I left town, figured that was the clean break. I didn't hear from her again. Not until tonight." He paused, scanning my face for a reaction I wasn't giving him. "I thought she'd told you." "I thought." He shook his head. "I guess I thought wrong." It was strange. There wasn't a surge of anger in that moment. Just a heavy, cooling certainty that my suspicions hadn't been born out of paranoia. They'd been planted years ago, watered by her lies, and now they were blooming in public. Lena eventually worked her way over, smiling just enough to keep up appearances. She made small talk with someone from her old chemistry class, all while pretending not to notice me and Tom standing there. But when her eyes flicked to mine, I saw it. The tiny flinch, the dart of guilt she couldn't quite disguise. The rest of the evening moved in slow motion. People kept stealing glances at us, at her, at Tom. I excused myself from 3 conversations I couldn't keep up with. The hum of the room felt like static in my ears. On my way out, I passed by Lena as she laughed at something too loudly, her hand brushing the arm of someone she barely knew. She didn't stop me, didn't follow. just kept performing whatever version of herself she thought would erase the whispers. Outside, the air was crisp, the parking lot lit in that yellow way that makes everything look a little worn. I sat in my truck for a full minute before starting the engine, the sound of those murmured confirmations still unspooling in my head. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't a scarf on a windowsill or a glass of wine with lipstick. This was history, buried, denied, but still alive in the voices of people who'd been watching from the outside. It was the first direct proof I'd ever had that Lena's double life didn't start recently. She'd been running it alongside ours for a long time. And now I knew. I didn't want to chase him down that night. The reunion had already given me more truth than I could swallow, and I wasn't sure I trusted anything that came out of anyone's mouth, least of all my own. But Tom texted as I was pulling out of the lot. "Let me explain. Coffee tomorrow? My treat." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I typed back, 9. Finch and Pine. I figured a public place would keep both of us civil. The cafe smelled like burnt sugar and fresh wood. I got there early and picked the seat by the window, the one where the morning light cuts across the table like a clean line. Tom walked in exactly at 9. No swagger, no team captain grin. Just a man who looked like he'd run out of rehearsed excuses. He didn't reach for a handshake. "Ethan," he said, and it landed like a confession. We ordered, sat, and let 2 minutes of small talk die. Tom wrapped both hands around his cup and stared into the foam the way you stare into a campfire when you know you've got to say something hard. "She came to me," he said finally. "Back then. A few weeks after your wedding." I didn't flinch, not outwardly. Inside, something loosened like a rusted lock finally turning. "She said she wasn't ready for marriage," he went on. "Said it out of the blue. We were at this bar near the river, the one with the low lights and the piano in the corner. She told me she felt like she'd been pushed down a hallway and the door had slammed behind her. And I believed her. I watched his face, looking for performance, but all I saw was a man embarrassed by the memory of himself. She started visiting me," he said. "At first it was just talking. I told myself we were, I don't know, processing? But then she'd show up with that look like she'd made a decision, and the conversations got shorter. She'd say she wasn't sleeping at your place, that she was crashing at her friends for work reasons, and I wanted to believe that, too. I thought she was leaving you. She implied it. I waited." "How long?" I asked. "A few months," he said. "Maybe longer than I want to admit. I kept thinking the next time she walked through my door it would be with a suitcase. It never was." He took a sip, grimaced at how cold the coffee had gotten, and set it down like he was putting a stone back on a cairn. "She told me she couldn't be a wife yet, not to anyone, but she kept acting like I was the exception to the rule. I wasn't." The morning traffic drifted by in glints of chrome. I could see my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, jaw tight, a man doing math with years and the people inside them. "She ever say why?" I asked. "Why me? Why then?" Tom shrugged. "She said you were safe, that you'd never make a scene, that you were steady, and steady felt like a trap to her. She liked the way I broke rules." He winced at his own words. "I thought that meant we were some kind of rebellion against the life she didn't want. Turns out we were just another room in the house she kept escaping." The bitterness wasn't aimed at me. It wasn't even fully aimed at her. It sounded like it was aimed at the version of himself who had swallowed those lines as if they were vitamins. "I left," he said. "Job in another city. I told her if she wanted me, she'd have to come with. She didn't. Said she needed time. I took the job and convinced myself that was closure." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Seeing her last night, I realized closure was just a nicer word for running." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old hotel key card, warped from years in a desk drawer. He pushed it across the table like evidence. "I kept this. Don't know why. Maybe to remind myself not to be that guy again." "I don't need souvenirs," I said, sliding it back. "I've got a house full of them." We sat with that. The barista called out names. The toddler banged a spoon. Ordinary life went on at regular volume while mine tried to catch up with itself. "I'm sorry," Tom said finally. For my part. For believing the version of the story that made me feel generous instead of guilty. I believed him, not because I wanted to, because the details fit the way a lost screw clicks into threads it was cut for. His timeline matched the hollow months I chalked up to honeymoon turbulence. His phrases sounded like her phrases, translated through someone else's regret. Did she ever talk about... I stopped, choosing a door in a hallway full of them. Did she ever talk about leaving for real? All the time, he said. But always tomorrow. Always after some milestone that kept moving. She'd say she was waiting for a sign. Then she'd say the sign came but the timing wasn't right. She talked like fate was a bus that never stopped long enough to board. He shook his head. I kept thinking she was torn between two versions of her life. I get now she was building both at once. The tearing was everyone else's problem. I felt anger rise, then pass, like a wave that lifts you and sets you down in the same patch of water. If rage could fix a timeline, mine would have snapped into place right then. Didn't. It never does. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Because I'm not sure what I can give you that the past didn't already take. Nothing, he said. Just the chance to say it out loud. To tell the truth without the old choreography. He looked me in the eye. She lied to both of us. Different lies, same weather. We finished what was left of our coffee. He stood to go, hesitated, then reached out a hand after all. I took it. It didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like a receipt. 2 signatures, 1 transaction closed. On my way out, I paused by the bulletin board where people pin guitar lessons and spare room ads. Someone had tacked up a postcard of the riverfront hotel with the piano bar. Coincidence, sure. Or the universe winking like it does when you're raw and everything looks like a sign. Back in the truck, I sat with the engine off and the radio on low. The song was something from our wedding playlist, which felt like a cheap trick by the cosmos. I turned it down and looked at my hands, at the indentation my ring had worn into my finger over the years. Skin keeps a memory, you can't talk out of it. Tom had given me a story I could finally hold up to the light. It wasn't the whole picture, but it showed me how early the cracks started. How long I'd been standing in a room that had already split down the middle. It also showed me something I hadn't expected. The shape of my own denial. I hadn't been blind. I just refused to call the shadows by their names. When I finally started the engine, I knew 2 things with a clarity that felt both cruel and clean. First, Lena's double life wasn't a detour. It was a map she'd drawn years ago. Second, if there were answers left to find, they were going to be hiding not in other people's mouths, but in the places she thought I'd never look. Home then, to the frames, the drawers, the boxes under the bed. To the version of our life that stayed still long enough to be photographed and filed. If there was a truth she hadn't managed to edit, it would be pressed flat between paper and glass, waiting for air. The day after the reunion, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't saved since college. Jenny. She'd been the kind of person who remembered birthdays and carried Band-Aids in her wallet. We hadn't talked in years. Can you meet for 5 minutes? She asked. It's about Lena. I didn't want to say anything last night, she began, eyes flicking to the sidewalk. But I overheard something years ago, back when you 2 were newlyweds. She swallowed. I heard Lena tell someone there was a letter she needed to destroy. My mouth went dry. A letter. She said it couldn't ever be found. That if it was, everything would unravel. Jenny hesitated. And she said it was addressed to someone with an initial. R. The initial hung between us like a loose thread. I didn't ask who she heard it from. Gossip mutates, but the bones of it rarely change. Jenny squeezed my arm and apologized for the intrusion. I thanked her anyway. She went back to her ordered life. I went home to mine, which suddenly felt like a drawer dumped out on the floor. I pulled our wedding album from the bookshelf. The thick leather one with the linen belly band and the faint scent of glue that never quite faded. I laid it on the dining table beside the framed photo we kept on the shelf. *T of us beneath string lights. August heat painting us with that dewy, flattering lie. I flipped through the album first. Smiles, cake. My father's tie crooked. Lena's hand on my chest the way people place hands on temporary monuments. No gaps. No envelopes tucked between pages. The frame, though, frames are little safes. I turned it over and saw the tiny bent tabs. My fingers shook, not from fear but from the sense that the past was a room I was about to unlock from the wrong side. I lifted the backing. For a second, nothing. Just the photo and a sliver of dust like moonlight. Then I ran my thumb along the edge and felt the raised ridge of paper. An envelope, flattened against the cardboard. Creamstock, soft with age. No stamp, of course. The flap had been sealed and then resealed with a tiny line of clear tape. The way you fix a break no one's supposed to notice. Across the front, in Lena's looping hand, R. Burn. I steadied my hands on the table edge and counted to 10. It didn't help. The air in the room felt vacuum-sealed, like the moment before a jar pops. I thought about the first apartment Lena and I rented, how we ate on boxes for a week and promised we'd always tell the truth, even when it was ugly. Promises are easy when there's nothing to lose. Real life arrives with receipts and hiding places. I wasn't angry yet. I was bracing, squaring up to whatever name the letter was about to give the past. Outside, a siren wailed and then faded to nothing. When I slid the letter free, the paper crackled with the tired sigh of something that's been keeping its secret longer than it was promised. I unfolded it carefully, the way you unfold a map you're afraid will show you exactly where you are. Ethan, don't, a sane voice said. But sanity had been a luxury item in our house lately. The letter started mid-confession, as if there had been a page before it or a conversation that didn't need repeating. I keep replaying that night in New York. The hotel with the green carpet and the piano 2 floors down. You said we were a storm we both asked for. I want to believe that. Today I bought a test. I think I already knew the answer before I saw it. I stood in that bathroom with the terrible light and tried on 3 futures like dresses I couldn't afford. I don't know which truth I can live inside. He thinks I can't get pregnant. I told him that months ago so he'd stop asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. If this is yours, if this is ours, I don't know how to hold it without burning down the life I already have. You asked me once, what do you want that you don't already have? I said, permission. You laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. If I disappear for a while, it's because I'm trying to build a story that won't destroy us. If I don't disappear, it's because I failed. Please don't call. Please don't show up. If I need you, I will come to you. L. The date at the bottom landed like a dropped wrench. It was from our first year, the winter when she'd said the doctor had found complications, that we'd talk about options someday. I remembered the way I'd held her. Relieved not to be the reason she was crying. Relieved to be needed. I remembered telling friends, when they asked about kids, that we were waiting. I read the letter again, slower. Not for the drama of it, but for the logic. She had built a scaffolding of stories around a choice she hadn't made yet. Infertility as a soft wall. Work travel as a hallway. Someday as a way of never arriving. Who was R? My brain went to a handful of names. A client she'd mentioned once, a researcher at that conference she'd loved, a man I'd met at a fundraiser who'd shaken my hand while looking at my wife. The letter didn't say. It didn't have to, not yet. It only had to tell me what kind of room we'd been living in. I traced the loop of her L with my finger and felt, ridiculous as it sounds, like a trespasser. This was a message that had not been meant for me, then or now. But living with someone is a kind of permission you sign every day. If there's a fire in your house, you don't apologize to the flames for opening doors. I put the letter back in its envelope and stared at the wedding photo. We were caught in a freeze frame of vows we'd both spoken and one of us hadn't kept. I thought about the scarf, the lipstick, the late nights, the reunion murmurs, Tom with his old key card, Jenny with her neat concern. Each clue had been a tile. This letter was grout. Everything locked together. Before I put the album away, a small square fell from between 2 pages. A bar coaster, cursive, are stamped in the corner, gold ink flaking. I turned it over. On the blank side, in Lena's quick shorthand, March 17th, same song. No year. Just enough to point me toward a piano and a city. I placed the coaster on the table beside the envelope and watched the 2 of them sit there like coordinates. New York. A hotel 2 floors above a piano. Are in the corner. March. A test. A future tried on and returned to the rack. I didn't cry. I don't know if that makes me cold or practiced. I felt the way you feel when you finally admit a word you've been avoiding because you knew once you said it, you'd have to live by it. The word wasn't betrayal. It was exit. I texted Jenny a thank you I didn't know how to phrase. Then I sat and waited for Lena to come home. The frame back on the shelf where it had always been. The album closed, the envelope sleeping behind our smiles. I didn't know exactly what I would say, but I knew this. There was no way to go back to before the letter. There was only the conversation after it, and whatever life found room to stand when the smoke cleared.